take a less generous look at it, critics will say, does Labour have a problem with black and Asian people? There appears, to many people of colour that I have spoken to, a schism, a gap between action and thought. There's the age-old question for all governments, which is how do you formulate foreign policy? How do you strike the balance between an ethical foreign policy, if that's, something that you desire, versus the realpolitik?
We're in the Dartington Library now with Sangita Myska, well-known and much-loved broadcaster, once of the BBC, once of LBC. And as we enter a new era of British politics, I want to talk to Sangita about the challenge that Keir Starmer faces in terms of reaching out to people of colour, in terms of ensuring that diversity is properly and appropriately represented in British politics. And I'm asking this question because, Sangita, as we've been here at the Byline Festival, you've talked about a couple of incidents before Starmer became Prime Minister that gave you, as a person of colour, real cause for concern.
Yeah, so the context in which I raised those points was I was being asked, for the highlights of the election campaigns to date. And I wanted to throw in a couple of the lowlights for me personally. And I think more broadly for that create questions, I think, in my mind, and should create questions in the minds of other people of colour. And I suppose the three standout examples are, number one, the treatment of Diane Abbott, and the fact that we were to discover through Newsnight that, in fact, the investigation into the letter, the column she had written for The Observer, had actually completed 5 months prior, and that she had essentially been left in limbo. The fact that Faiza Shaheen had been whipped off as a candidate in Chingford, essentially summary justice meted out to her for what appeared to be liking a couple of tweets years before. Then there was the letter that was sent to Martin Ford KC, a threatening letter from Labour's lawyers, essentially accusing him of doing his job, and he might face a reprimand of some kind, legal action as a result.
And for people who don't know Martin Ford's history?
So Martin Ford KC was appointed by the Labour Party to carry out an independent investigation into claims of anti-Semitism within Labour, and to look at the wider question of racism within Labour. And what he concludes is, yes, there was anti-Semitism, but there was also a problem around racism, particularly in regard to black members and Muslim members of the Labour Party. And he is, I might add, a really eminent KC. And then at the last minute, we have this story emerging of a young black man, 27 years old, I hope I pronounce his name correctly, Javan Awosu-Nepal, who had been due to stand against Farage in Clacton and then was rung up and told, get out of Clacton, go and campaign somewhere else, give up the ghost. And his agent ends up resigning as a result, saying Labour really must make a stand even if it's going to lose, right? What connects all of these people, right? 3 of them are black. I'm going to say it. 3 of them are black. One of them is a Muslim woman. So if we take the most generous reading of this, the optics are terrible for Labour. If we take a less generous look at it, critics will say, does Labour have a problem with black and Asian people? And to have that hanging over Keir Starmer's head as he becomes Prime Minister is not a question mark that should be hanging over his head. When you stand back and you look at the shadow cabinet, the truth of the matter is it was Boris Johnson that created the most racially diverse cabinet in British political history. And I know we could have an argument about whether or not that cabinet under Boris Johnson had diversity of thought. Well, you could have the same argument about Keir Starmer, right? So I think there are question marks. What I was saying to you is that I've yet to meet, and these are my friends, so it's a self-selecting group. I'm yet to meet a black British person who feels that Labour dealt with Diane Abbott in the right way. I've met plenty now who say that they have withdrawn support from Labour, albeit temporarily, and they want to see Labour be a racially inclusive party. They want that actively demonstrated because they feel the Labour Party over many decades has taken for granted that people of colour will vote for them, because the assumption is that Labour is a progressive party that represents social justice. And now there appears to many people of colour that I have spoken to, so I'm caveating this particularly, a schism, a gap between action and thought and image. That gap has to close.